welcome. It's such a delight to have you here. I've known you for many years now, but I realized I'd never really knew the details about what you did prior to learning the Enneagram, and then how you learned the Enneagram, and then what made it especially meaningful to you the way it did for me. And I changed the course of my career because of it. But what year was it that you learned about the Enneagram?
It was in the early, about 1993 or 4. So how that happened was like, was it serendipity? Was it whatever it was? So I live in California, still did then. And I was a full-time parent and also a full-time organization development consultant, trainer, coach, which I'd been doing for at least 2.5 decades.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty intense to be a full-time parent and to be having a full-time career and all
For
that.
sure.
And I have this go-to place for myself where I used to go to for my retreats or just time away, which was Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California.
Yes.
And one of the things about Esalen, yes, that's pretty cool, is they have programs that are, all kinds of different sort of growth topics.
Yes.
And I'd been to many of them over the years because I had been trained as a Gestalt therapist, and I used to work at Esalen. So
When did you work at Esalen?
Right around the time I was getting my PhD, right before it. I just sort of started because I was being trained as a Gestalt therapist, and part of my training was I had to go to some Gestalt training programs led by people other than where I was being trained, which was in Philadelphia. And so I went to Esalen because it had a strong number of people who were teaching Gestalt there. And I kind of fell in love with it from being a workshop person. I stayed for several months, and then I said, I don't think I'm going to go back to Philadelphia. And then, but then I went to California after that to get a PhD in a Gestalt kind of org change kind of program. And I would go up to Esalen all the time. I had lots of friends there from having been a gate guard, lots of friends.
Yeah, of course.
Meet them, visit them, have a lot of fun with them. It's okay. So once I was down in California, now I'm a person. I'm no longer married, but I'm a single parent and I'm older, and it's still my go-to place. So I decided to go to there for time when I had some time off from my client work, and the only program that was offered at the time that I wasn't familiar with or hadn't taken, I was just overdeveloped in some ways, whatever, was the Enneagram. So I go tracking myself up there, and it's a beginning Enneagram course and led by Helen Palmer. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So, and I'm reading the book, and somebody comes in, a woman, and she comes over and she goes, I'm sitting down, she's standing, she goes, I don't know you, but I like you.
Yeah, that sounds like Helen.
I didn't even know who Helen was,
Yes.
or she never even introduced herself. So, I just thought she was some woman that walked into the room.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it turns out that that particular course was mismarked. It was advanced. I'm like, okay. So anyway, but that's how it's happened. And then after 5 days of that, I thought, I really was never liking personality systems because I thought they were reductive, but this felt like sort of the anti-reductionistic. It doesn't make you less than you are. It shows you more of who you can be and more possibility. So then I decide, well, I like this only for my own personal growth. That was because that was it. So I go, but the only way to really get that is to go through Helen's program. Now, if somebody else had been teaching it, say Dawn and Riso, I probably would have been trained at the Institute, it's just my own. So I go into Helen's program as a, trainee, right? But right as I left Esalen, and I'm standing at the hill. I don't know if you've heard this story. And I saw a blimp come into my mind's eye.
No.
And I'm not the kind of person that's, sees things really, but I now do, and a blimp came in. It said, your job is to bring the Enneagram out more into the world. And I said, that's not I'm not. And it said, it doesn't matter what you want to do, and I said, well, what am I supposed to, came back again. What am I supposed to do? And it came back and said, just be still and it'll be clear. That's how that happened.
Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary because you followed your guidance for sure. And now you've taken it around the world. So,
Like being struck by lightning,
yes,
It wasn't
yes.
like just a dream. It wasn't like it's just a little message. It was like,
Yeah.
and even to this day, Catherine, if I'm sort of challenged with it's like I'm writing a book on something, or I've got a client with everything, and I'm not sure about something, I'll go outside and I'll see, there'll be another blimp. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have a message on it, but it really speaks to me.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing. I actually saw a few symbols in a dream like 40 years ago. Well, more than 40, I guess, because I've known the Enneagram 40. But I didn't know what some of those symbols were. And then one of them was the Enneagram, and the other were three symbols that were Egyptian. And then I saw them when I went to Egypt many, many years later.
Mm-hmm.
There is something where we're just aware of nuances, and often they give us indications of where we're headed or what we want to do. Same thing happened to me. I mean, I met the Enneagram when I was in a class with a teacher that was talking about symbols. And when he came to the Enneagram, I go, oh, I've seen that before. Where have I seen that? And he said, well, has anyone worked with the modern day application of the Enneagram? And the woman sitting right next to me, and it was a large group of people, said, oh, I have. And she went through a program with Kathy Spieth when she was getting her PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said a little bit about that. I go, can I learn more? And that's how I learned. And I had Kathy Spieth's notes, never having met Kathy Spieth, but in 1985. And then it was a pivot. Now, I loved typologies and I was a personality expert by then, but the Enneagram was the one system that could hold them all, just as you said, could show you where you could go and the high side of your defense strategies. So tell me, when you saw that blimp, how did it come to you that you began teaching? And I imagine you took it into your work. And then when did you start doing the train the teacher?
Okay, so sometimes people think I had a grand plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I go, well, I'm going to go into Helen's program because there wasn't that much available, and I knew Helen, and I liked,
Yeah.
that process, and so, but there it was like pretty demanding. It wasn't like another week. It was
Yeah.
this week, and part of what you had to do, and I was still only in it for my personal growth because the blimp had said you're supposed to do more than this, but not to be concerned about what the what was. So okay,
Yeah.
I can do that. So then part of the program then was you had to, as part of that program, you had to type 20 separate people.
Right.
And
Right.
okay, you remember those days?
Yes, and record it.
Okay, and recorded, but we weren't using video then, it was just audio. 10 of them had to be recorded, right? So I'm like 20 people. Now I had just moved down to Los Angeles and I had only been recently down there. And so I didn't have, friends down there. I didn't have 20 friends. I had 20 relatives, but it's never that great an idea to type your relatives, right? That's a little,
Yeah.
can be, but it may not be. So I had a lot of clients because I was traveling. So I used my clients and I would give them a copy of Helen's book as a thank you.
Yeah.
And then we did that. And then they would say to me, well, gee, this is really pretty good. Interesting. Can you help me with my leadership, or can you help me with my team? So that's kind of how I got into it. It was
Yeah, no, that,
part of the grand plan. So then I had to create some materials to go with it, right? So then I met, now the IEA at that point. So I was trained, I went to the first Stanford conference, okay, fine, as a participant.
we probably crossed each other and didn't even know.
The campus was so huge.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, good. So then, I did a session on, it was actually a pre-conference. It was in San Francisco on interaction. And people used to come to the pre-conferences, a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had like, I get almost 100 people. I had at least a half of most of the people came, then people had options for pre-conference. So
Right.
then I'm teaching them in interactive ways, how to teach Enneagram interactively. And then somebody said to me, well, what do you use for materials? Now I just come from a client right prior to the conference. So I had some of the materials that were very rudimentary in my briefcase. So I showed them, I'm just in front of everybody. Well, the session's over. They start swamping me I'm on the podium. Can we buy these? And I'm like, well, they were, first of all, they're pretty junky for what they look like now, but
Yeah.
I didn't have very many. I had no plan to sell. I had no idea what to sell them for, but people are just taking my tools and I didn't know what to charge. So they're putting money in my pocket. I felt I had money coming out of everywhere. And I said, I guess there's a need for training tools.
Yeah, there really was.
So see, this is my non-planned plan. Sometimes, Catherine, people think I'm a 3. It's silly because I don't have plan. I don't even like.
Yeah, neither do I. I just follow
I
that
follow emergence.
logical thing for me.
I didn't have a plan. So my friend, Anne Murray.
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
So Anne's a good friend. She's been a friend forever. Then, so and Anne's a 2 also. And she goes, Ginger, you're selling these tools now and they're in better shape. You better now the tools themselves can't do any harm with it. If people don't know how to use them, they just sort of sit there. But why don't you do a train the trainer on how to use these tools? Because then people are going to really think. Remember, my job is to bring the Enneagram more in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's like, okay, this distribution channel of the tools and train the trainer professionals. So that's how that all happened.
And then what year was that, do you think? Like, I remember the first time we could present was 97, and I presented my research on this.
Do you remember where that was?
That was in Maryland.
Oh, I remember Maryland.
And I think
maybe we went after that.
Yeah, so 98 was in Denver, because I was on the board of the directors.
I don't remember like that kind of stuff so much. I just remember
I think it was
the Maryland conference because I couldn't stand the food.
I think it was 99, to tell you the truth, because while I was on the board, it was those 2 conferences. So the one in Denver and the one in San Francisco, right? So I better.
I mean, I've been to so many IA conferences, they start to blend together.
I know, for sure. I just remember
I got into it.
Little details. So then, where you're different is you didn't just like make everybody do an interview, but I ended up having friends of friends of friends because I was doing free typings. And I guess being in the Bay Area, there were more people that knew about the Enneagram and were referred to me. And then I just kept going. Instead of just doing the 20, I did 500. So I was videotaping most of them just because I wanted to understand for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen the panels like you. I'd seen them at the conference and I'd seen them in the training with Helen and David, as you did. But yes, I've always liked the way you work with you pulling people out of the audience, and your experience shows. So how did it go from there to being a book to then teaching internationally?
So prior to my Enneagram exposure, I had been thinking, I'll write a book someday. I'd been approached to write books on different topics by publishers, but none of the topics were something I wanted to immerse myself in.
True, I understand that.
You know what I mean? So, but I had some expertise in them. I just didn't feel like spending my time doing that. Plus, I like the engagement and the creation and engagement with people and stuff like that. So, right, okay. So then what happened was, I remember I'm on this blimp saying your job is to bring the Enneagram more into the world, right? So I'm like, there's a book that I'm supposed to write, but what? So anyway, eventually, what I did is I've put together the behavioral science models that are not just that I've created. I mean, I can create my own, but I'm a behavioral scientist by background. These are models, and then the premise is you have a model that somehow reflects something in reality, and then you use the model and apply it to another situation and see, does this fit? If not, you change the model. So it's an iterative theory practice process, which is also good with the Enneagram. So I'm like there, but since I had all these models that I knew I worked with, like models of dealing with conflict, models of feedback, models of communication, models of leadership, models of models. I thought, oh, well, these models work, but what if I can wrap the 9 types through these models? So you not only get them this way of enhancing your leadership that works really well, but its subtext is, and there's 9 different ways to even use it that way. So that was my thing.
That sounds great.
Yeah. So then I decided, well, I'll write a book, because see, at that point in time, and this is my opinion, okay, the only really good book out there on the business application was Michael Goldberg's Getting Your Boss's Number, 9 Ways of Working.
Yes.
Otherwise, people haven't really worked in business and all that. Now, what Michael, he really did, I mean, I sort of see him as having topped the field a little bit to open the space in that space. But he does more description and some development, but doesn't really apply it with models and behavioral sciencey things.
I agree.
Sort of an actiony thing that I do. So I thought, well, let me try this. I'm trying to take it, to the next level. Because the blimp said to do that, right? It's like,
no, and your abilities too. Like, I'm the queen of handouts, where you get all the information and all these different handouts and you put them together. But you have the skills of being able to write as well as pull from all the education that you had, experience that you had. Yeah.
That's true. And I also, one of my very good friends was the queen of materials and tools development. So she, it's like, I learned a lot from working with her. And then from my OD background, one of the things we always did was we did interviews to find out what was going on, but we did content analyses to take it to accurately, but working from data to knowledge to sort of with, so I know how to do content analysis. So I can take a bunch of information and look at patterns and bring it to, so it's simplifying what's complex without oversimplifying it. I mean, that's kind of what I was doing in the organization. So I brought that to this. The other thing is I have a memory that's, I would call it based in neuroses, but useful.
Yeah.
So one of the things is, because my family of origin was highly dysfunctional and I was the baby. I mean, dysfunctional beyond things. I was always trying to figure out, what can I do? What can't I do? I'm not a 6, but it's like, is this okay to do? What's, can I come from under? I just had to pay attention, a lot of attention to what was going on. So like that, for the dynamics. And so I developed I think it's from a pretty strong memory for experiences and conversations, but I'm primarily visual. So what had happened was, so I could predict. So this, you can come out now. No, don't come out now. So it's that thing. So I can, it's like, even when I wrote my books, like, and I didn't know if I didn't know the Enneagram, but I could remember people and remember their patterns because I could see them. And then I would almost feel like I was back there with them. And then I remember the dialogues.
Yeah, I can do that too.
And so
I did that from the time I was a small child. My mom said she felt like a bug on a board, because I'd say, Mommy, why are you saying that when you really mean this? And why are you saying you're happy when you're not? All right. And I would do that with her friends. So she felt like
discrepancies too.
But it was trying to understand why people were the way they were. And pattern recognition is something we're usually just born with. But if we have life experiences that really bring it out, like, I had no idea other people don't have the pattern recognition that you have or I have. I just thought everybody had that and they just didn't use it. But they don't. But how they remember is important. Like I'm visual and then kinesthetic. So then I can remember how it felt in my body, and then I get the dialogue.
That's exactly my order.
Yeah. So that is a gift in and of itself. And that's probably why you went in the field that you did and wanted to be a behavioral scientist, because that is totally in keeping.
Right.
Like that in the cosmetic industry. It was like studying human nature at a very extreme level, because it was so competitive and just so different than what I grew up with in a beach city in Newport. But having said that, it was very helpful that I just tracked these patterns and then I could kind of begin to see why people were doing what they're doing. But the Enneagram, for me anyhow, more than any other typology, filled in the mysteries about people where I might project a certain quality that maybe they didn't have. But Enneagram types gave me that arc and what I didn't know. So I found it fascinating because then I could more fully understand people. And then when you started using it on a regular basis where you wrote your book, do you remember the year you wrote your book?
Definitely. I mean, there's a reason because there was an event, but I wrote it in 2003, 4. So it was the pub date is 2004, but I started writing it a little bit earlier than 2004.
And then how did you decide what was going to go in there? Which models did you decide would be the most helpful or that you wanted to bring in?
Well, I decided to organize it. This was sort of not how Enneagram books, not by type, but by application area. Because and then there was a model for that application area, and then I wrapped the 9 types within it.
Yes.
Right. I'm so visual, and I imagine if you're this as visual too, I always say to myself, if I can't draw it, I don't know it. I don't understand it. So I have always been drawn to models of things, but I always check out, is this true? How would it be used? Okay. So I was very familiar with a lot of different models. So and some, they're all, some are really good and some are not, but
yes,
but it had to be a model that was simple enough that you could run it was useful, it was good, and you could run the 9 types by it. Because if, say, you have a model that's got like 5 elements, that's fine. But you take a model that might be really good, but it has 20 elements, you can't run 9 types to 20. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
So it had to have a simple elegance to it. So every model I chose from amongst things. And if there wasn't a model, I created one.
Oh, excellent. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Can you say more about one that you created?
Well, that's more true. Let's say it's more true in my leadership book.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that because I create models all the time. And like when I was kind of a fixer sort of person in the cosmetic industry, wherever there was a problem and orders weren't being passed, they'd send me in to create an event and get the orders passed. But my pattern recognition, I could go in and look through 10, 20 different stores and what had been ordered, and I could just go, wow, okay, you're overstocked in this, and this store. Let me see that store. Okay, this area has this number of overstocks, no interstore transfer. Okay, then I'll make sure that goes into the promotional event. You needed a teacher to tell you that you had that pattern recognition, because it was either 7th or 8th grade. I think it was 7th grade math teacher that asked me to stay after class. I thought, yeah, it's probably with those brain teasers that he did at the beginning of each class to get us to calm down. I never got them right, but we'd have to hand them in and then he'd start the class. And he said, no, I just have to tell you about your answers. And I go, yeah, I already know. I didn't get any of them right. He said, no, but do you know it's almost statistically impossible to be that close to the answer every single day? I go, what? I just thought he didn't know what he's talking about. And he goes, no, I think you need to know you're a mathematical intuitive. Don't worry about getting the numbers right. You feel math. And he said, well, what were you doing? I think I was imagining those numbers, but I couldn't hold them and see them. And like that 10 plus 2, I see 10 coming in and out, 2 coming in and out, the plus sign, the line, they're all moving for me. So I have to write it, but I can feel it, what 10 plus 2 is. So, but I didn't know that. And it wasn't until a few years later that I was told that again, that I realized how that's going to help me. But then later, my husband, Spencer, and Brandon's dad, he could work faster than a calculator. probably like your ex-husband. But when we'd go to buy something, we'd have a budget in mind. And let's say we were going to get chairs and a table or what have you. And I would go in, I'd scan, but I'd factor in tax, delivery, and I'd round it. I didn't know the exact number, but I knew whether it met our budget or not. And I'd say, okay, that one works. And he goes, wait, we haven't done the math. I go, yeah, we're going to come under our budget, by just a few dollars. But he goes, no, what did you do? And so he was another person who made me realize that. So you do the same thing. You're seeing the picture and feeling it. And so I just have to say, people that are really good at typing in the Enneagram, and it's noteworthy that both of us have spent time creating materials on how to type, have a very similar gift of being able to see that picture. So with me, I had done a questionnaire when I was in the cosmetic industry, because at one time or another, there were tiers under me. There'd be my direct reports, but then there were people in every account. And so I just sent a questionnaire asking them pretty much what my Enne-style questionnaire is now. I just added more to it when I learned the Enneagram, but I got all the core fears, the idealized images before I learned the Enneagram. And why did I do that? I talked everybody into it, whether they were in display, a store manager, a divisional manager, every person everywhere. Oh, come on, don't you want your personality represented? I would just talk them into it. But as a result, when I learned the Enneagram, all I had to learn were the defense strategies and Naranjo's version, where he modified the defense mechanisms. And I thought, wow, these match. So they do. So when you say, did a model work or not work? Could it be used in other ways? I totally agree with you. So what made you end up teaching? Like in my case, I was invited to go other places. How about you?
I already was a teacher, trainer. I mean, there was no big leap there.
But
like, so I'm certified. The certification programs came from the tools. So I'm teaching and I'm designing, and I have a lot of background in designing learning experiences for years. I mean, my PhD is in education. I was in interactive learning, since I was 23 years old. So
yeah,
that doesn't, so it's like, it's not, I don't even know how to answer that question. It was like, well, if I'm bringing the Enneagram into organizations and applications, I need to teach it. If I'm training other professionals how to do things like this, I've got to train it. If I'm gonna, I mean, I don't know, it just was.
no, I mean, I understand. I'd done trainings my whole career in different areas, but with the Enneagram, it was just such an easy thing to, having been in the corporate world and knowing that structure and being able to apply it by changing a few words. I didn't start teaching in business till probably 1990. So you must be starting around the same time.
Oh, earlier. No, I mean, if you're talking about the Enneagram, see, I've been a trainer.
The Enneagram, though.
Yeah, no, the trainer, middle 90s. But
Yeah.
I've been like an organizational trainer and consultant and coach since the 1970s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, full-time, big companies, external, internal, you name it. I mean, that's just kind of what I did. So it's just,
So you just took it and applied it to what you were already doing.
I already knew how to design and do this and do that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't.
Now, did you find with the Enneagram in business, as I did, that you like teaching at the Federal Reserve, and any time I taught in kind of a federal place, you could not use the word spirituality. You could not use, of course, sexual for the sexual subtype. And of course, they didn't want anything that would be deemed inappropriate. And that's when I started talking about personality diversity, because they'd say, well, what difference does this make? And I said, well, it's personality diversity, because a lot of these companies were really big on all the other diversities.
Yeah, I totally agree with you the sexual, I call it the one-to-one subtype because.
Yeah, that's when I start going at 1-1.
Break, you know, it's like you can't really use the word sexual in, and it's okay. I think I don't mind it. The spiritual thing is interesting because I think I do use the word spiritual. I don't but I don't enter into an organization with the spiritual
Yes.
first. But I have found with some of my clients, especially if I get a little, work with them longer, is they can feel the spiritual aspects of it if they're doing their real work and sort of letting down the masks, and they go, God, what is this? We feel like we're in a state of grace or something. And it's like, yeah, that's, so there's that. So I did a session.
Divisions were differently. I taught in every division at the Federal Reserve, and for like 15 years, I'd go back for contracts. So they got better. And, talking about 2003, when your book came out, that's when I taught Team 5 at the time. And then they each brought 2 people. But it was amazing because they got it even faster. And they explained that money's progressive. So they would introduce things. And I taught at Schwab as well. And same thing, money. But I hadn't really understood that until like probably the 90s, even though I had worked with businesses of every kind, you name it, whether it was voir dire or, working with jury selection. I used the Enneagram and the typologies in everything, but I preferred working with people that wanted to go deeper or where there was continuity. Remember when you did your research? That was really great. That
the benchmark.
2011, the benchmark. Yeah, I introduced that. I had a couple of your slides, and then I would use that at the beginning of all my business trainings.
Yeah, that was the ultimate of content analysis.
Yeah, certainly.
All this interviews from all over the world, and we had to put it together. But yeah, so kind of like, okay,
so what made you decide to do the benchmark study?
I mean, I know I'm shrugging my shoulders, and it sounds, I think, well, wow, it was a lot of work and a lot of all that. It wasn't that big a decision. Okay, so I have a network of people called the Enneagram Business Network. And these are people who've opted in, and there's price, and they get benefits, and to kind of, it's a developmental network. So for development, it's not designed for referrals, although that can happen. Okay, and so that's been ongoing on since 2009, and people come and go, but it's there's probably a good core that have been there. Some basically people more or less can leave whenever they want to. It's I only say I'm only monogamous in love. It's like oh, where you want to go. It's like do what that. So there's mentoring. I mentor the seniors, and the seniors mentor the associates. There's about 70 usually. That's fine.
Yeah. So
at around that time, 2011, 10, people were asking our network members, just in general, what are kind of some of the best practices? What's kind of, if we're going to bring the Enneagram in more, what do we need to know about how to do that? Benchmark.
Yep.
So, because I had done a benchmark study that I created with a colleague of mine on diversity initiatives. And she and I had made it up. She been through the same PhD program I had, but several years later, but we two pretty smart heads together. And we was like, well, let's just do and see. And we had a lot of contact with very senior diversity consultants, okay, who all worked all over the world. Okay. Now, at the same time, the Center for Creative Leadership was doing a kind of a study on best practices. And I don't know if we were aware of that, but anyway, our results turned out to be the same as their results.
No, I wasn't.
This is diversity.
In your research.
No, this is like years, maybe 10 years earlier. So we got the same results they did. So actually, when CCL heard about this, they got really intrigued. I ended up pairing up with CCL and doing a lot of their diversity.
Great.
Cool. And with Ann Morrison, who was then, that was pretty fun in those days. But the process that my colleague and I created, I knew how to do that without having to go directly into companies, because benchmarks are typically you go in, you observe, you do lots of interviews.
Right.
With the the fast pace of organizations, and I didn't think people could. I was getting clients asking me, okay, we're thinking about using you, but can you give us the name of 3 other clients and we can talk to them? And I'm like, I could, but they're too busy.
Yeah.
Just too busy, and they aren't going to really want you to come visit them because they're too busy, So this was also for clients. So I sort of transported the process that I had co-created around how to do a kind of a benchmark without having to go on site.
Yes.
And then the network, I asked the people in the network if anybody was interested in joining me, and several people sort of so they were from all over the world. So, and I think we had about 8 people or 9 people on that team. And it's like, we worked our rear ends off. I mean, it was like interview and interview and interview, and people had to ask the same questions and write everything down. And then
yes.
and they sent it to me, and then I was doing my, very anal, trying to be objective content analysis. That's
because
where you got that
qualitative,
when we did the report.
it's what you're going to discover. It's not whether you're trying to prove it or not, but you were doing both.
We weren't
So
trying to prove anything. We were trying to learn something. We had a query, a question. What are the best practices in bringing the Enneagram into organizations at this point in 2010, 11? I mean, that was the question. And how could we go about finding that out? I mean, that was why.
And I think that's what the Enneagram's really good at recognizing. Like, all my studies have been primarily qualitative. I've done 24 now. And I ask the same questions in all of them for the lexicon, since I started with that before I learned the Enneagram. But even when doing the quantitative, it wasn't as informative as the qualitative, because it would be what we didn't know about the types. And when you have people from all over the world that don't know each other answering that open-ended questionnaire with the same words, or sending the same pictures, phrases, or words, that's when I was hooked, actually. I mean, interview after interview after interview. I did 3-hour interviews. And then when they have something the same, like when the 3s chose the cigarette ad merit, but it's yes, it's this, and you got merit. It was all the perfect words for a 3. But, when one came from Australia and another one came from Germany, and then there were 5 that came from different parts of the US, and they hadn't been in all the same trainings together, but they had seen that ad, like traveling, when they had and when I said, send me words, pictures, or phrases back in the 90s, like 94, it was right after the conference, people wanted to participate. So it was a lot of work, and I didn't need to do it. I did it because I wanted to. I have never needed to do any of the studies that I've done. It's been my own curiosity. As you say, without a plan, it would just be the next thing I wanted to know in another area, and another twist, or what about these questions? Or people think this, but is that true? Let's see what people say.
Right.
So how many products do you have now? Do you know? And how can people
define a product, Katherine?
Well, I don't even know how many I have, but okay, how many books?
9 books.
That's extraordinary.
Then there's 30 training tools. Then there's, let's see. Oh, I have a bunch of certificate programs, professionals, probably, I mean, I don't really know, because sometimes I don't run them all every year. Sometimes I run, I don't know, between 5 and 8, I suppose. And then.
That's a lot. No, I always saw, at least when I saw comments on Facebook, you were a lot of different places. Like,
I might have
more than I.
Yeah, but something, so let's see. Remember, I can't count, and I don't really count. I just
that's right.
30 because we added 2. And then we have on our website what we call, sort of freebies. We have these mini books where there's that just, you can just go there. That can be about 25. That's a product. See, I consider a product, even though it's free. It's like,
it is a product. It is a product. Yeah.
That's fine.
I forget about those too, but they are products.
They're product.
Yeah, like all my free videos are products.
Stuff like that.
What I was going to ask you, though, with respect to that, is what is your address, your website address, for those that are watching?
the Enneagram in business.com.
That's excellent. Now, is there anything that you feel that you want people to know about how you see the Enneagram or what?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that's also kind of a little bit back. So I landed into Helen Palmer's thing, right? That said, I also was really was very well read of books at that time. And I think it's really important not to be an adherent of any particular teacher, but to go to resources that are actually reputable, because there's so much now available. It's, if you're new to the Enneagram, how do people know what's accurate, what's true, and what's just,
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. Yeah.
and that's really a problem. But I would say go to good sources and go to multiple ones. The second is whenever, see, and I was also heavily influenced by Don Riso and his thinking and work, and also by Claudio Naranjo.
Yes, indeed.
And, I've been exposed to lots of other people and I'm influenced by them, but those are probably my three majors. But the other is, and I think this is important, it's, if somebody tells you something is true in the Enneagram, to have not a belligerent eye or ear, but to have a questioning stance and go, how is that? What's your source? How is it really true? What else could be true? And is it useful? Because sometimes people are making a lot of stuff up, or they do something. There's a lot of making stuff up. Or that
they are indeed. It's just an idea
useful,
that they have.
right? And they might say something that might be useful, but it's not that true. But it's like to have a traction, so you're not on a slippery road just buying whatever it is that you're being fed. It's very important, I think, as the Enneagram goes forward, for people to be well trained and well educated. And the system isn't simple. Okay, so people sometimes will latch on to things just to provide them some structure, but it may not be true. The system isn't that complex either. It's like, it's the paradox. It's both simple and complex. So can you hold that? It's also got a lot of paradoxes in it. Can you handle paradox? Right? So I think it's really fun. I mean, Katherine, I probably am speaking for both of us when I say it's not boring. I mean, I've been
I've never been bored 40 years.
I've been bored with a lot of other jobs and different things, but this doesn't get boring.
No, we're still here. And I totally pivoted. Well, it was gradual, but then that's all I do is the Enneagram full time every day, all day. And even when I don't need to be doing it. But having said that, I totally agree with you that I learned so much from each certification program, who they learned from. And then when I did the research on the history, that what came from whom and when, and most people don't know that. And like when Naranjo's work was first being disseminated, it was through Kathy Spieth, but she did not give credit to Naranjo. She gave it to Ichazo, whom she had not studied with. She had learned from Claudio. So he was not given credit for his work. But when I did that research in '94, everything led to Naranjo. And
yeah, but they had been a relationship and they had split. So
right.
I'm not
he shared that in training. Yeah.
Whatever.
He said it was a bad breakup. So. But my point being that there are pieces that are taught every day that are incomplete or misunderstood, like integration, disintegration. He said he was misquoted, that he never meant to imply you go one type in stress and in the other insecurity, or integration, disintegration. You always do both, but he kind of played with that idea. But then that became concrete because Robert Oakes from Loyola loved the idea of sin and redemption. So he stayed with it. And so there are different Enneagrams. And of course, Ichazo's Enneagram is totally different. They started out similarly, but then they're like two different worlds. But kind of the Enneagram of process and the types, if you get the universal understanding that should be confluent between all teachings. And that's why I love that you're telling people to find out and to learn where it came from, because you'll feel the continuity. You'll feel what's consistent. And that's the benefit of conferences. You can go to a lot of different teachers. You don't have to do full certification programs the way I did, but you can really be exposed to a lot of different things and then know what you want to pursue more. Completely agree. And yeah, thank you so much, because when I had taught at the Federal Reserve for a couple years, and then Diane, she said, well, Katherine, what would you suggest I bring in? And then I just gave her the people that I thought, and you were one of them. And I said, they're all different. And I said, you might want to try the body work. I don't know that the introverts will like that, but it's really good work. But they didn't like it because her area was IT, but so she was bringing people in for that area, but then she would refer all the divisions to the Enneagram because she really believed in. In fact, she really was responsible for getting the president of the LA branch to come to a training that I was teaching. And then he also sold the president of the San Francisco branch and to get it to Team 5. So I really attribute her.
She was quite the influencer.
Yes, yeah. Extraordinary person. And at an extraordinary time. And if you think about it, she was in IT, but she got it in there and out.
Not that unusual that
Yeah.
for the IT function to be attracted to
The progressive people. And she was, a 1-2-5 and just like wanted all the details. So that's why she continued to want to bring in a lot of diversity to just keep people interested. And she really was responsible for so many people that worked under her, learning about themselves at a young age. And yeah, very extraordinary person. Very extraordinary. I need to give her a call. I'm realizing I'm talking to you. But just bringing in the different teachers with our different experience and the way we applied it was very enriching.
Right. I mean, there was another company that did that early on too, which the bringing in, the embracing of and the bringing in, which was Starkey Newer. Remember that's, you may not have been involved with that. I think Tom Condon was, I was different. Chad Jorgensen, do you remember?
Yes, yes. But that was
Around
later.
that same era. It was, and they, some of these early users were very passionate.
Yes. Oh, yes. We all
passionate and really got the Enneagram started in the organizational settings. It's pretty cool. And they often would bring in not just one, but more than one, because they wanted to people to get different perspectives and
and being excited by it too.
Right.
And seeing how
I don't know that happens anymore, really.
Well, it's different now, isn't it? Because most people are learning about the Enneagram online, and then they don't really know the dimensions of it. And so first they're learning the very superficial Enneagram. I learned from a person, but she learned from someone that had worked in a deeper way. So by the time I met other teachers like Tom or whatever, and I really liked Tom because he was one of the first people using an approach, which was Ericksonian hypnosis or NLP, to help people work with their passions and fixations in a way. I was trying to get to the internal experience because I found that was the change element. And if I had private 3-hour sessions in business that were confidential, then I could get to whatever was needed to help people type themselves. And I was never obligated to say anything more than their potential type and then instinct and later tri-type. But I wouldn't do the other kind of interviews. I'd come in for conflict management, but it still had to be confidential.
Right.
So that's an individual person's prerogative as to how they do that or what they know or what they consider important. But I teach like a conglomerate of everything I learned. But like you, Helen and David and Don and Rusty were very significant since I certified with both of them, and Ted and Kathy. But Naranjo, what was so incredible to me is that I had done this research by the time I met him for 2 years. And when I was asking him, he asked me to bring my research because he'd seen Enneagram Monthly. Do you remember Jack and Andrea? Jack had published a little bit on the subtypes, my chart. And I think by that time, by 96, the Enne style research, how people see themselves. And Naranjo noticed it. And he mentioned it to Jack, and Jack said, well, she's going to be in your course in 96. And she's got a whole nother body of research that she's mapped out with the subtypes. Can you see if she's got it right? And he said, well, have her bring it. And so I did. And it was a really rewarding experience because he literally read it that night that I gave it to him. And then he decided to include it in the full training and to test it out. And that's where I introduced him to, didn't he have countertypes for all of them, not just the 6? And he goes, no, people want me to have a counterphobic for each type. And I go, no, I don't mean phobic. I mean counter to their type. And that I saw it in a stacking order, like I did the instincts themselves. And he said, oh, yeah, no, that seems right. So let's see. So he was very generous that way. So for me, yeah, I found him extraordinary because he didn't know what came out in my research, but he recognized it as true and then filled in parts I didn't know. So a lot of what is significant for me is those things that were so similar, that people who didn't know one another, what they said, and then what he ended up being willing to share, and then went on to teach. But in 1996 was the first time he taught publicly in the US. And he said 1972, but I know he did small things, but that's another story. So I think a reason there are different perspectives is that there was not a consistent person until he came back. But those who were teaching and working with others were learning a whole nother set of data. So yeah, I agree. So I encourage people like you do to get, the big picture of the Enneagram and to look for confluences and also what's true for them, and can they find how it's true for them and in what way, and does it help them? Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Ginger.
You can also cut that out if you want to.
Okay, bye-bye.